Hey beauties and beasts! Our late night skincare story time is on. So gather around, bring your serums, pour yourself a drink, and let's unwind. Tonight's story will make you question just how far people will go in the name of science and what it really costs to become a doctor. This happened to a woman named Rena, and if that name sounds familiar, yes, it's that Rena, the same girl who saw the pregnant woman in the blue dress from the other episode. Well, she sent me another crazy story, so I really had to share this with you guys. Back then, Rena was a medical student, just another sleepless soul trying to survive anatomy class. So when she bought a set of human bones for her studies, she didn't think twice. Everyone did it. But what she discovered about where those bones came from changed everything. Because sometimes the pursuit of knowledge doesn't just cost money. It costs a piece of your peace. Let's begin. 15 years ago, Rena was offered something most students only dream of, a scholarship to study medicine in Bangladesh. This was it, her chance to become a doctor, to save lives, to make a difference. She was excited, terrified, determined all at once. But here's the thing about medical school that they don't put in the brochures. It's not just hard because of the workload or pressure. Sometimes it's hard because of who or what you're studying with. Rena landed at one of the most prestigious medical colleges in Dhaka, surrounded by the brightest students in the entire country. These weren't just smart kids who did well on their SATs. These were the survivors of brutally competitive entrance exams, the kind where thousands compete for maybe 50 spots. And Rena, she was the foreign student, the one who came in through the international quota. So you can imagine how that felt, like walking into a room where everyone's already fluent in a language you're just learning to speak. But Rena was determined. She threw herself into her studies with everything she had. And in medical school, that meant getting up close and personal with death itself. In anatomy class, and if you've never taken anatomy, let me paint you a picture. You don't just memorize diagrams from textbooks. You dissect actual human organs. You stand in the anatomy hall, cutting into tissue that once belonged to a living, breathing person. You visit the mortuary and watch postmortems, observing as doctors examine the dead to understand how they died. It's intense, but it's necessary. And for most students, it's the first time they really confront the reality that we're all just flesh and bone. But Rena's story isn't about the anatomy hall or the cadavers in the mortuary. It's about what came home with her. At Rena's medical school, students didn't just study bones in class. They bought them, real human bones, a complete skeleton, all 206 bones, for personal study in their dorm rooms. Think about that for a second. Imagine sleeping 10 feet away from someone's entire skeletal remains night after night. Back then, she told me a full set costed around $200 to $250. Not cheap for a broke medical student, but it was considered essential. So if you wanted to pass your exams, you needed to know every bump, every groove, every tiny marking on every single bone. And the only way to really learn that was to hold them in your hands, to study them until you could identify each part in the dark. Rena saved up and made the purchase. The seller, everyone called him Mama, which means uncle in Bengali. He worked in the forensic department. He handed over the bones in this huge metal case, like an old-fashioned steamer trunk you'd see in black and white movies. It was a heavy, cold metal case. You know, the kind of case that looked like it held secrets. When Rena opened it in her room, she immediately noticed something. These bones were old, really old, and in that bone business, that matters. So when bones are fresh, relatively speaking, they have clear markings, she says. The grooves where muscles once attached are deep and well-defined. The little pits and impressions are easy to see. But as bone age, those features fade. They become smooth, worn down, and harder to read. And Rena could tell that her bones were ancient. The markings were faint, barely visible, which meant they'd been used for teaching for years, maybe decades. Passed from student to student, handled by hundreds of desperate medical students, just like her. And here's what made Rena's heart sink. Old bones were cheaper bones. She'd gotten a discount because she was buying someone's remains that had been in circulation for God knows how long. She lifted the skull out of the case and held it in her hands. The eye sockets stared back at her, empty and dark. And for just a moment, she wondered, who were you? What was your life like? Did you have a family? Did anyone miss you when you died? But she didn't have time for philosophical questions. She had exams to pass. Rena stored the metal trunk under her bed and got to work. Medical students don't sleep much. That's just a fact. During exam season, sleep becomes this luxury you can't afford. You survive on coffee, adrenaline, and sheer force of will. You study until your eyes burn and your hands shake. And when you finally collapse, it's not really sleep. It's more like your body temporarily shutting down to prevent complete system failure. Rena was one of those nerdy ones. She studied harder than most, stayed up later, pushed herself further. Night after night, she'd spread all the bones out on her bed. Femurs, tibias, the delicate bones of the hands, the vertebrae of the spine, the skull always watching from the pillow beside her. She would quiz herself until the words blurred together. Foramen magnum, zygomatic arch, iliac crest, greater trochanter. I hope I got the pronunciations right. Anyways, it was during her first year final exams when this happened. She was studying as usual, surrounded by bones, her textbook open, her notes scattered everywhere. She was holding the skull, tracing the suture lines where the cranial bones fused together, when exhaustion finally pulled her under. She didn't mean to fall asleep, but medical school has a way of making that decision for you. In the dream, Rena wasn't in her room anymore. She was sitting in the back of a rickshaw, one of those bicycle-powered cabs that weave through Dhaka's chaotic streets like water through cracks. The late afternoon sun was golden and hazy. The air smelled like exhaust fumes, street food, and that particular urban sweat that comes from millions of people living on top of each other. And she could hear the rhythmic squeak of the rickshaw's pedals, feel the bumps in the road rattling through her seat. The puller was thin, his back bent from years of labor, his shirt soaked through with sweat. She couldn't see his face. Then suddenly, everything went wrong. Two buses, massive, crowded, moving too fast, converged on either side of the rickshaw. There was no time to swerve, no time to shout. The rickshaw was caught between them like paper in a vise, like a sandwich. The sound was horrible, metal screaming against metal, the crack of breaking wood, and underneath it all, something wet and final. The rickshaw puller's head snapped forward. Rena saw it from her seat, saw the moment the life left him, saw the blood spreading dark and quick across the pavement. And here's the thing that made this more than just a nightmare. In the dream, Rena wasn't just watching. She was there. She felt the impact. She felt the terror. It was like she was living it through his eyes and hers simultaneously. She woke up screaming. And when she woke up, her hands were wrapped around the skull, gripping it so tightly, her knuckles had gone white. The empty eye sockets seemed to stare at her. Rena dropped it like it had burned her. Her heart was hammering so hard, she thought she might be sick. The dream had been too real, too vivid. This wasn't some ordinary nightmare about buses or accidents. It felt like a memory, someone else's memory. She shoved all the bones back into the trunk, pushed it under her bed, and didn't study any more that night. Instead, she lay awake until dawn, listening to the sounds around her, trying to convince herself that it was just stress, just exhaustion, just her brain processing too much information at once. The next morning, she sat for the exam, and she passed. But the dreams weren't done with her. Anatomy finals weren't just one test. They stretched over days, sometimes weeks, with different external examiners brought in from other medical colleges, which meant Rena had no choice. She had to keep studying. She had to keep pulling out those bones night after night, spreading them across her bed like pieces of a horrible puzzle she was being forced to solve. A few days later, she fell asleep again. This time, she'd been studying the long bones, the femur, the tibia, and she'd been holding them, feeling the weight of them, trying to memorize every ridge and bump when sleep dragged her down again. And he was waiting for her, the rickshaw puller. She recognized him immediately, even though she'd never seen his face clearly in the first dream. But now, in this dream, she saw everything. His weather-beaten skin, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun for decades, calluses on his hands, the worn-through knees of his trousers. He was sitting on the side of a road, and he was weeping, not just crying, weeping. The kind of grief that comes from the soul, deep and inconsolable. He was mourning himself, mourning his own death. And the worst part, the part that made Rena's chest tighten with sympathy and terror all at once, was that he seemed surprised, like he hadn't expected to die, like he had plans, people waiting for him, a life he thought would continue. In the dream, Rena wanted to speak to him, wanted to say something, anything to comfort him, or at least acknowledge his pain. She opened her mouth, and then someone grabbed her shoulder. She felt fingers, strong, urgent, desperate. She felt fingers dig into her flesh and shake her violently. Rena's eyes snapped open. She was alone, completely, utterly alone in her room. The door was locked from the inside. The window was closed. There was no one there who could have touched her. But her shoulder still ached where those phantom fingers had gripped her. She sat up in bed, surrounded by bones, her heart racing so fast she thought she might pass out. The skull was on her pillow again, though she didn't remember putting it there. In the dim light from the street outside, those empty eye sockets looked almost sad. Rena did the only thing she could think of. She prayed. She whispered every prayer she learned as a child, every plea for protection she could remember. And then she went back to studying. Because what else could she do? She had exams in the morning. She had a future to build. And if that future meant sharing her room with a ghost, then so be it. But acknowledging the ghost, even silently, seemed to give it permission. Over the next few weeks, as exam season continued its relentless march, Rena started hearing things. At night, when her dorm room was quiet and she was alone with her books and her bones, she would hear a man clearing his throat, a dry, rough cough, the sound of someone trying to get her attention without startling her. And this was an all-ladies dorm room. There were no men allowed, not even maintenance workers after dark. The sound shouldn't exist, but it did. Night after night, sometimes from the corner of the room, sometimes from right beside her bed. Once, horrifyingly, from directly behind her as she sat at her desk. And Rena developed a coping mechanism. She would pretend not to hear it. She would whisper a quick prayer under her breath, just a few words, barely moving her lips. And she would keep her eyes on her textbook. She wouldn't turn around, wouldn't acknowledge it. Because some part of her knew that if she really looked, she might see something she could never unsee. And her roommates never mentioned hearing anything. The other girls in her room seemed to sleep peacefully, unbothered by phantom coughs or the weight of the dead. So Rena just kept it to herself. She studied harder, slept less, and counted down the days until exams would be over and she could finally get rid of those bones. When the last exam was done, when she'd written her final answer and walked out of that examination hall, Rena didn't celebrate. She went straight to Mama, the bone seller. He worked in the forensic department, which meant he spent his days with the dead, documenting them, cataloging them, preparing them for burial or cremation, or, in some cases, sale to desperate medical students. So he was used to strange questions. But when Rena asked him about her specific set of bones, about who they'd belong to, he just shook his head. I don't remember. It was too long ago. These bones, they've been in circulation for many, many years. They could be from anyone. He explained what Rena already knew. Most of the bones came from unclaimed bodies, people who died alone with no family to identify them or claim them. Some were used as cadavers for dissection in the anatomy hall. Others, like hers, were cleaned and sold for study. The rickshaw pullers, Mama added, almost as an afterthought. They die in accidents all the time. Traffic here, you know how it is, very dangerous. Many bodies come through here from road accidents. Could be her bones were from someone like that. Rena felt something cold settle in her stomach. A rickshaw puller, killed in a traffic accident, caught between two buses. Exactly like the dream. She wanted to do something, wanted to find his family somehow, offer some kind of help or closure or acknowledgement. But how do you find the family of a man who died so long ago? He'd been reduced to teaching tools. How do you say, I think I've been dreaming about your dead relative? There was unfortunately nothing to be done. So Rena did what every medical student before her had done. When the new academic year started, she sold the bones to a junior student. Got her money back, minus a small loss for wear and tear. The girl took the metal trunk with a nervous smile, probably thinking the same thing Rena had thought a year earlier. This is just what we do. This is just how we learn. Rena never asked if the girl experienced anything unusual. Some part of her didn't want to know. These practices, using real human bones for medical education, they are not really done anymore, at least not in most parts of the world. Now we have synthetic models, 3D printed replicas, virtual reality simulations. The ethics have changed. We've decided that maybe there are some lines we shouldn't cross, even in the name of education. But for Rena and the thousands of students like her, this was how they learned. This was how they survived their anatomy exams and went on to become doctors. By studying death so intimately that sometimes death studied them back. Rena told me that after that year, after she finally got rid of those bones, the dream stopped. The coughing stopped. Her room was quiet again. Just a normal dorm room in an all-ladies hostel. But she never forgot the rickshaw puller, never forgot the weight of his skull in her hands or the sound of his grief in her dreams. And she never forgot what he taught her. Not just about the structure of a human skeleton, but about the cost of the knowledge she was pursuing. Because cadavers and bones, as she learned that year, aren't just objects. They are not just teaching tools. They are people. They were people. And if you listen closely enough, they still have something to say. Rena became a doctor. She saves lives now, but she told me that every time she walks past a rickshaw, she still whispers a prayer, just in case he's listening. That is the end of tonight's story. I cannot even imagine what studying with real human bones would feel like. And it's good to know that medical students don't do that anymore. I hope you guys all liked Rena's story. Thank you so much, Rena, and I'll see you on our next episode. Until then, sleep well. Bye-bye.